Our scripture this morning is from the book of Matthew. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Ancient words for our modern day consideration.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. Good to see everybody. Don't ever be embarrassed if a child is restless. We're just happy to have them here. And we do have a room there where you can hopefully do both. But I don't know if you remember being a child in a church, but it's not always the friendliest experience. There is. I mean, it can really feel like you're in a museum and you're just afraid of moving, kind of thing. So I think to realize that the children are a lot more important than anything I'm going to say, not to take away from but how we treat the children affects the world generations from now. So the kindness and love and not making them feel like learning their name, that's always a good thing. Remember that when an adult remembered your name. In like the church or a religious setting, that's very important. But we're not going to talk about the day. That's not the topic. When I was a kid, though, I really wanted to see God, probably more than anything. And in Sunday school, I learned a really simplistic understanding. Like many of you, I was taught that these are stories that happen in history. And that doesn't really fit very well when you learn about science, right? So a lot of people just kind of build a cave for religion, and when nothing's really at stake, they'll go to the cave. But we can do better. And that's what we're trying to do here, is to have something that really works in our real life, and we don't have to fake or pretend. I remember as a little bitty kid, it just didn't make any sense to me that God would hide. God was acting very much like somebody who doesn't even exist. And I remember a prayer I did, very devout prayer, 5 or 6 years old. I held a rock up and made a deal with God. I'm going to let go of the rock, just let it float for a couple of seconds, and I'll never ask the question again. And I'll give my life away, as a kid. And I kept my end of the bargain. But the rock didn't float. It just went straight down. And really all my tests wound up kind of like that. And I heard the verse, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And I realized I must not be very pure at all, because I'm not seeing anything. I'm not getting any clues. I'm not seeing footprints. I can come up with things. I say that was an omen, right? That somebody left that there to teach. It's like you can do that if you want. But the life you live in, something you can really put your weight on, That's what we need the sacred to be. A couple months ago, we did a sermon series looking at the paintings of Van Gogh as kind of these mystical treatises. And in them, I talked about how if God is transcendent, in other words, if God is the source of space and time, of the universe, then God can't really be a being within space and time. I mean, you can see the clues that are there. But what I said was trying to find a concrete God in history is like looking for Van Gogh in one of his paintings. To think about the source of things, you have to move to a different kind of understanding. Meister Eckhart was somebody who had incredibly deep spiritual experiences of the sacred. But he said the problems that most people have is they're looking for God the same way they would look for a cow. You want something that fits in your sensual experience, but that's not the source of your sensual experience. And there's a sense in which I was betrayed by my Sunday school teachers. Not their fault, they didn't know any better. But I was taught a religion that was going to cave in as soon as I got to college. Anybody else here have that kind of experience? And what a lot of people do is split in half, right? You have your spiritual side when you're desperate, and then the practical side. Again, I think we can do better. I decided to be clever and get a different painter to make the same point. Thought maybe y'all would catch me with this. So I chose Michelangelo. I need a pointer. So this is a picture of the creation of Adam. Very, very traditional. Looks like what I was taught in Sunday school. But this time I saw something different than I've ever seen before. I don't know what happened, but it just kind of jumped out at me. Have you ever noticed this background? I'd never noticed that before. And what I remembered was that Michelangelo very surreptitiously, very secretively dissected bodies. Because what he realized was that he was going to paint the human body, he needed to know what's underneath the skin. And one of the things you see in a lot of Christian art is it looks like everybody's had their bones broken. It doesn't look, it's not anatomically correct kind of thing. So what do you think Michelangelo was saying here? The human brain, and you have the spiritual kind of playing through it. Michelangelo got in trouble with the church a lot. And he returned the compliment. The Sistine Chapel has a lot of passive-aggressive moments in it. Because basically what they said is you can't be scientific and do sacred art. So he hid his anatomical discoveries in the sort of the background of things. There's another where it looks like God's face is very weird, it's a very strange neck, and that's another sketching of the nerves that go up to the eye. Michelangelo had come to believe that the sacred is something we experience directly in reality. Now think about that. It's not a secondary magical world. The symbols for him call deeper into his experience. And he said, every time I create, I feel my source there. And for him, that was God. He was very passionate in terms of being spiritual, but his coin wasn't fitting in the church anymore. So that's a picture. Let's look at the second one. I ran across a couple scientific or Academy publications. This isn't one of them, but it showed that background, and then it shows the brain to kind of help visualize that. What happened was Michelangelo became a mystic. And this is really, bottom line, what I'm trying to do. I want to discover a type of mysticism that embraces science, embraces human rights, embraces nature. We can do it, but if you take the symbols literally, you have to choose. If the symbols aren't calling you deeper to something that transcends your experience, then it's going to get in the way. They become cataracts that keep discoveries from taking place. And one of the worst enemies of discovery through the centuries, one of the worst, has been the church. Right? When things were different than they had been taught, or when people were different than they were taught, they tried to go back and make the old symbols work in the same way. Jesus called that putting the wine in old wineskins. You have to be able to grow with all you are. If the Spirit cannot be found in the heart of your reality as you live it, you'd be better off without it. Most people carry religion as a kind of a burden instead of having something that carries them. So we're looking today at the ideas, blessed are those pure in heart, for they shall see God. We're going to look at a passage that's one of my favorites, but it's not one you hear preached on very much because it doesn't work with Orthodox Christianity. Ready? Let's go to that. This is 1 John chapter 4. If you've heard 7 sermons by me, I've probably alluded to it in at least one of them. Beloved, let us love one another because love is of God. Everyone who loves is begotten of God and has knowledge of God. Is that what you were taught in Sunday school? Everyone who loves is begotten of God. Not just can see God, but is being born out of their source. With the best of their talents, their heart, their mind, their strength. It's all the medium through which it's being presented. Everyone who loves is begotten of God. A loving atheist is closer to Christianity than a cruel theologian. If your love feels like everybody else's hate, that's the wrong track. Those who do not love have known nothing of God, for God is love. God's love was revealed in our midst in this way. I will explain this in a second. God's love was revealed in our midst in this way, by sending the only begotten into the world, that we might have faith through the Anointed One. Love then consists in this. And here's another thing that you do not see in the church that would be considered heresy, but it's right there in the teaching. Love then consists in this, not that we have loved God, but that God has loved us. And then again, I'll explain this, but it says, and sent the only begotten to be an offering for our sins. Next. Beloved, if God has loved us, so we must have the same love for one another. Here's another one. No one has ever seen God. Yet if we love one another, God dwells in us, and God's love is brought to perfection in us. Mystical Christianity. We're going to break that down. We're going to look at one verse at a time, 3 of the verses. Everything breaks down in 3. So first, let's look at this idea that no one has ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is made complete in us. Can we go back to the origin of the first slide? Yeah, I want Michelangelo to get the last word in. If what I say doesn't make any sense, just meditate on that. Something is happening through human consciousness, right? It's not something that's made up. The symbols of religion help us experience it, that present it dramatically with real people doing the parts. But that's not the way your life is going to look. It can be the way your life feels. So that's what we're trying to understand. So the first of the verses from our passage is, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is made complete. I mentioned Meister Eckhart. I'm going to be mentioning mystics a little bit through this. He was one of the most profound Western mystics there is. If you're going to start studying Christian mysticism, that might be one way to start. He sounds very much like Rumi. He said, we look for God the same way we'd look for a cow or a rock or a stone. We want something that makes our senses feel safe. But the source of your being cannot be that. The source of the universe cannot be an object in the universe. Again, for the same reason, you're not going to find Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel hidden somewhere. You'll find Michelangelo everywhere as the source, but you're not going to find an object named Michelangelo. Think of it this way. If instead of human beings, we were light bulbs that we could think, and we're looking for our source, we might start looking for a giant light bulb that made us. That's a logical starting place, it seems. But that's not really the source of the light. Then the light bulbs might start looking for a very intense light, like something more intense than anything they'd ever seen. And yet the source of the light is actually shining out of the darkness. People might want to turn their cell phones off. The source of the light is shining out of the darkness. That's another place in John's Gospel. Electricity is not like light. It's not visible. But if we think then that electricity is going to be only found in light, then we're not going to understand that the iron and the toaster are turning that same energy into heat. And the refrigerator is turning that same energy into the cold. When we talk about the symbol God, and it's a symbol, it has to point beyond any specific thing. It has to embrace them all. Yes, it's our source, but it's also the source of dolphins and fish and insects and trees and stars. So it can't have a shape, right? Something that's everywhere can't have a shape. But that doesn't make it less valuable. It just means we have to change and stop looking for an external thing and find it in the heart of our experience. Helen Keller famously said that that which is most important can't be seen. And she said it better than Melanie. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen nor touched, but are felt in the heart. So the seeing impairment actually made her more sensitive to the depths of things. She wasn't overcome by her sensual impressions, and she could realize that no person or object lasts forever. Everything is impermanent. So our home has to be deeper than that. Our home is in the principle by which things change. That makes us uncomfortable to begin with, but that's our home. One mystic said, let me give the names too, because I'm butchering their quotes. Julian of Norwich said, the fullness of joy is to behold God in everything. So instead of looking for God as another version of ourselves, to realize that God isn't hiding from you. Everything you see is a word of God. Everything you touch, every experience is an expression of your ground. If you can remember that, then the tragedies of life don't have to be final. And you can learn that you only hold on to things for so long, because impermanence is what makes it possible for you to be here. So we love and we let go. We come from our source, we return to our source. And that has to be okay. It's not enough to say, I'm going to accept impermanence, even though I hate it. We have to affirm and realize that the beauty of life comes connected to the impermanence of life. An artist is always grieving. Michelangelo always felt inadequate. Yeah, it's hard to believe, but beauty is very fleeting, and it's something that none of us gets control of. But the beauty isn't separable from the sadness. They're connected together. And that seems like bad news, but it's really good news when you're sad, to realize there is beauty there, always. The second verse that strikes me as not Presbyterian, and I'm going to call the police and tell them, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. This is love, not that we loved God. How dare they? We're Presbyterians. We're Christians. This is love, not that we loved God. Can you really love your image of God? You can try, you can fake it, you can bluff it. But if you believe in hell, that sounds more like a monster. Right? You can be afraid of it. But what John is trying to tell us is you can't love the transcendental, but that's okay because every being you encounter, including you, is an expression of it. And that you can love. That you can love. So John says, the essence is not, love is not that we love God, but that God loved us. Now, the example he gives is of Jesus, which is bad news if you're Buddhist, atheist, whatever. But that's not what John means. John has one of his little teaching parables saying, I'm the way, the truth, the life. Nobody comes to God through me. That's the starting place. What gets left out in traditional Christianity is when he says, what you do to the least of these, you're doing to me. So grown-up Christianity is not about Sunday school lessons. It's about finding the sacred in your real life and being able to love the real beings in your life as manifestations, as direct experiences of the source. That's what Michelangelo was passionate about. The religion he'd been taught was always getting ready to experience the sacred. You die so you can get there. Jesus dies so you can get there. What he experienced was a direct manifestation in every being that he ran across. What that requires is a radical revolution of our consciousness, where we realize, we can look at this and realize that our consciousness is a light shining out of the darkness. Your consciousness is a miracle and a sacred thing. You can't see it because it's that by which you see. It doesn't happen to you, it happens through you. So you don't find the proof unless you realize that what you love, what you care about, when you're creative, you're expressing the creative principle of the universe itself. Another mystic said it this way. Let's see. Teresa of Avila. Did I pronounce that right? Avila. Any Italians here? Or I guess that's French. Oh, where is it? Where is it?
She was a Spaniard.
Oh, she's Spanish. Okay.
And actually, she was Jewish and her family converted. You know, they had in Spain University.
Okay. Teresa of Fort Worth. I know Fort Worth. Said, all things come to the soul from its roots, from where it is planted. See, that's what Michelangelo was experiencing. You don't have to make it up. You don't have to pretend to believe something. Again, when you're dying, you're not going to be able to hold on to anything. You will feel yourself slowly slipping away. What peace there is if you realize you're slipping back into your source. Whatever that is. That you wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. So if you don't remember the Apostles' Creed, that's hunky-dory. If you can't remember one scripture verse, that's not a problem. Just know where your home is. The final insight that I want us to share today is that line that says, everyone who loves is born of God. I was taught that it's all about Jesus. And I don't think that's what Jesus was saying. I think Jesus was trying to say we are all the children of God. All of us. And maybe we can't see it in ourselves, but we can see it in Jesus. And then he says, tag, you're it. What you do to the least of these, you're doing to me. That's when you have to let go. The resurrection isn't when an individual body gets up. I don't know, maybe Jesus did, I don't know. But the resurrection is the life creative energy that's always there. And as I read the story, it happened when people saw Christ in each other. Christ dies as an individual and is suddenly born. And this perception people have of the tie that binds them together. And Jesus is no longer the individual teacher, but the spirit that connects them. Even if it happened literally as the story says, what's important about it is not one-time event in history, but the principle of eternity. Principle that will always be there. What happens once is what philosophers call an accident. It could happen, it doesn't have to happen. But what the symbol is pointing to is the very principle of your being. To not be afraid as you get older. To realize that each of us are expressions of something that isn't born and doesn't die. And we can't hold it, we can't hug it, unless we do it with each other. Another mystic, I'm trying to quote some mystics, says, authentic life is the most personal form of worship. Everyday life has become my prayer. That's Sarah Ban something, Bathrak. She's not a classical mystic, but you don't have to be. When you see the sacred in the ordinary, you're a mystic. So, as a kid, I really wanted so bad to see God, and I'm so glad I didn't, because I'd be in a home now. But I cared enough to go insane to try to get that. But I just found out there's a better way. And it's what John says in his passage. Y'all don't have to find it, I've got it. Number one, no one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us. And God's love is made complete. Second, This is love, not that we loved God, but that God loved us and sent. It's, they say only begotten one, but it's every one of us. We're all the precious only child, only children of this source. And then finally, everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Well, that's my struggles with the text. We'll take a moment for you to think about how you would understand the words.